So, if we know that consumer surplus, that idea of what you are willing and what you are actually have to, how will that differ for producers?
They're willing to decrease low price.
And what, if we think about that idea of like for a firm, what would you like to do? Would you like to sell it for what you're willing to, or would you like to sell it for something that's actually much higher? Much higher, yeah, because that's going to be associated to their idea of like their profit incentives that they can then get for it. So the producer surplus is the difference between what they actually sell the goods slash service for and what they are willing and able to sell at. In terms of your diagram then, we are looking at the component that goes underneath it. So supply, demand, quantity, P, and this area here is your producer surplus. I'm just going to use PS, and you would assume that for the firm, their aim is to increase producer surplus linked to a profit max objective. What might, hopefully it's relatively self-explanatory. The consumer is going to want to do what to that producer surplus? Reduce it. So the consumer would like to reduce producer surplus, and the government again, what are the two things that it would also like to do with that producer surplus potentially? So reduce producer surplus in terms of protecting consumers, or if it doesn't impact the idea of their production and their output and their employment, what can I do with it as the government to help me fund everything else? Tax it. So, same logic applies in terms of the factors that influence it. So we're going to have shifts and elasticity. Price, quantity, price, quantity, supply, demand. So what I would like you to do, so in the first diagram here, I want you to think about what the firm would like, what would the firm have to do to try to increase the producer surplus for demand? What would it have to do with regards to supply and how it could do that? And then we'll look at that with elasticity. So think about on the demand side, what would have to happen to impact producer surplus and what actions could you take for that to happen? On the supply side, what would have to happen to increase producer surplus? How could they physically do that? Okay, so what is a firm going to want to do with the demand curve? What direction? Expand or contract? Expand. So at the moment, you've got producer surplus. If I can increase the demand curve to D2, Q2, P2, then this area here will be the increase in producer surplus. Right, what actions What can firms do to try and encourage an increase in demand?
Decrease
Say that again?
price. Decrease price.
Problem we've got here, prices are going up. Changes in price are about movements along, not shifts. Advertising, so adverts. What other components?
Decrease price.
Cost is going to be a supply side factor. Possibly, yeah, different things in its product portfolio, and particularly if there's high profit margins on that, I'm not going to disagree. Anyone here done a bit of business studies, your marketing mix, James?
Increase the quality.
Possibly, so you could increase the quality of the goods slash service, or improve like the product. Uniqueness of it, yeah.
Differentiated.
Say again?
Being different.
Differentiated, yeah, all of those will sit in there. You could increase the like availability, I guess, put it online, etc. Anything that you've got with that idea of specific, like they can't impact the population, but they can do advertising within those elements. They can't influence substitute prices of other products. They can try and make it fashionable. I guess that idea of what comes in with adverts, maybe trying to make that like a social media campaign so that it goes viral, potentially as part of it. Right, what are they then going to do in the supply curve to increase producer surplus? Contraction or expansion?
Contraction.
You sure what's going to create that area to be most? If I move it inwards or if I move it outwards? Outwards. If I can get it towards S2, because if you imagine where I've got that dotted line, obviously this part of the box, this bit here, this area, A, B, C, D, that is going to be lost producer surplus. However, this black area is going to be producer surplus gained. And you would potentially argue that that box is bigger than the box that is lost, part of that, E2, Q2. So, what actions can I take to try and increase the supply? You mentioned this one, Joe.
Decrease costs.
Reduce costs. So the aim is to try and reduce costs / increase productivity. What do a lot of firms use to try and become more productive and lower their costs, for example?
Economies of scale.
It could be linked to that, yeah, their size and scale. What's the main thing that we're using in production that's cheaper? Go on, Ollie.
Mass production.
Yeah, massive, because then what can I take advantage of? What can I use?
Economies of scale.
Yeah, that's what Joe's mentioned there, but in particular when we're dealing with economies of scale, we've got things like Adam Smith's division of labour, and we get those workers to work alongside. What are you going for? Say it again? Machinery, so things like automation is part of that. Obviously, if you can increase your market size, so you might try to do this, which then allows you to supply cheaper as part of it, I'm not going to disagree with. When we look at economies of scale in year 13, when we deal with theory of the firm in a little bit more detail, we'll look at those components that will help us. Okay? Right, then if we look at the idea of elasticity, so we'll start off price, quantity. So if you imagine, we've got, keep with a simple demand curve, an elastic, so these are just to demonstrate the differences between the two. So an inelastic curve and an elastic curve. Let's call this EPQ, let's call this EP2, Q2. So you can imagine we've got that area here, producer surplus for inelastic, or the idea of this black area, producer surplus for elastic. What you might find, so if I look at a potential answer of that nature, what would you argue about the kind of blue and black area that's on that graph? Relatively what? Relatively similar. So that might not be something that you necessarily target, which would suggest maybe the actions of a firm would be more associated to this and this. Okay? It's about them working out, well, why would you look at that particular avenue? If we do it with regards to an elastic and inelastic curve, supply, demand, demand, here we've got inelastic, here we've got elastic, Q, Q2, P to P2, E, E2. If you imagine, so here is the kind of old producer surplus. It's sometimes easier to draw this with the supply curve going right to the y-axis. If that's the old producer surplus, this box would then become the what?
No.
So, why would it not necessarily be new? If it was going to be new producer surplus, what would I still have to colour in? So, this bit's going to be gained because this bit hasn't been lost. Because I would still colour in that area there below that point. So this will be the increase in the producer surplus. Little exam tip, just to be careful with that. So the new producer surplus is that area plus that blue area. It's both of them. What can we see has happened there to that producer surplus? Make sure we've got our P's and Q's on there. So what's happened? The firms want their product to be elastic or inelastic. Inelastic. So if you can make PD more inelastic, then that can increase producer surplus. What are the kind of two big ones that they could possibly try and focus on that makes it more inelastic? If you think about that carefully, that they can affect. What might they want you to think about their products in the market that makes it more inelastic? Say that again?
A necessity, like a need.
Right, so the idea of so whether or not it's a necessity or linked to addictive natures or quality. So if you look at the idea of social media, okay, if I can create certain electronic algorithms, that means, like, I don't know if you've experienced this, imagine, so if you've ever watched TV or a film, if you've had your phone like in front of you on a coffee table or something, and because it's there and it's within your peripheral vision, you feel the need to like pick it up and go on it. Ever experienced that? Try it as a little experiment and you'll find there'll be like a natural gravitation towards it. There are things within the systems that encourage you to go on it and go back on it. And if you think about a company like Facebook, how do they generate their money? Because it's free for you to use, so how are they making money? Advertising revenue. So the more you're on it, the more money that they make. So they might put things in there that are more addictive within its nature to encourage that more inelastic use of it as part of that process. Okay. Same with like gambling. Yeah, if they can encourage you to do it more and more as part of that process. What's the other one that they want to try and reduce within the market? The amount of reduce the amount of such, i.e. to try and create a unique good/service via things like product development, or again the idea of like promotion, so that you think it is the best as part of that area.
So, can I take a picture?
Yeah, not a problem. Okay. We'll stop there at that point.